So I want to start out with a question for Ines, our filmmaker. Um, do you have an update on what has happened with the issues and the topics that were discussed in your film?
So I'm actually going to let Yesenia do the update on the Shroud site because she's much more hands-on around that. But I should note the film came out in 2023. It was part of this Earth Arts Chicago initiative. I don't know if any of you had heard of that. It was a public art initiative where artists got to do neighborhood-based environmental artworks, and mine was the only video that they funded. So the film came out first, and it premiered in a park, which was wonderful. So it has since shown at universities, community screenings. It actually was on top WTTW. So 2 years forward, we're now at the One Earth Festival. I'm so happy to share the film with you here now. I think one major change is the film ends with the struggle around the confined disposal facility at right at the lake. Friends of the Park, Alliance of the Southeast filed a lawsuit. The alderman then came on board, also spoke up against it, and then a year later, State's Attorney Kwame Raoul filed an amicus brief, so that was a great step. And then this past January, the Illinois EPA said that the application, because the Army Corps just wanted to expand, basically build up, um, was unlawful because there is you cannot expand existing landfills in Cook County or start new ones. So they were clearly in violation of that. And now they, in March, withdrew the application. So it's a clear win, which is wonderful, but you don't see it in the film because there's this time gap. So activists, between protests, letter writing, getting kind of elected officials on their side, lawsuits. I think all that's kind of my takeaway. All of these things in combination actually can have a great effect. So, just in terms of organizing work, maybe Yesenia wants to tell us a little bit about the Shroud site. What's going on there?
So-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so updates on the Shroud property. I'll just start off by saying the Superfund process is a really lengthy one. On average, it takes about 20 years to complete all the phases, beginning with sampling and testing of the site all the way to the end of remediation and actual reuse and repurposing. And so right now, US EPA has recently completed their first phase of soil sampling and surface water sampling, such as for Indian Creek, groundwater sampling across all the different categories. And per a request of community, we've demanded more rounds of sampling. Because there's additional sites, residential sites, families that live along Indian Creek that were, that samples weren't taken from their homes. And we have also asked for more sampling to be done on Indian Creek in the case of certain weather events, like mentioned in the film, in terms of flooding and when it backlogs, back floods. And so that's where we're at now. US EPA is working on getting the funding to continue that sampling, but they did share the results of the first phase with us. And not surprisingly, the results show exceedance in every harmful toxin thus far, most predominantly lead, manganese, and chromium were the highest levels of those. But alongside that, very importantly, we've been socializing and engaging the Superfund site process with residents because the cleanup that takes place is dependent on what the end use is. And unless community is demanding a fabulous end use like recreation or housing or something of the sort, something that's different from the industrial status quo, um, they're going to do the bare minimum, right? If there's not enough uproar for something different, they'll just cap the site essentially, and it'll just be home to likely another industry. And so that's really what we're working on in the community level is just encouraging people to dream big and really demand what they want to see happen there because it's so critical in this process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and really highlighting how community-driven action can push forward for change. Um, that kind of, Gabby, I know working for the city, it'd be great to get your perspective, one on, what is the city generally doing on issues around environmental justice, and then specifically the Hazel Johnson cumulative impact ordinance. Yeah, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I actually want to invite Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. If you could tell us a little bit more about what cumulative impacts are and the work that PCR has done and the legacy of your mother. If you could share a little bit more of the history behind that.
Well, my knowledge of the community impact ordinance is really about looking at communities that's been overburdened with industries in their neighborhood. And it's really talking about really multimedia exposures also, air, water, and land. And in our neighborhood on the southeast side of Chicago, we have multimedia exposures, and we have so many different industries in our community, and we're trying to determine, having those many, what is that impact is on the community. We know it's not positive because most of those industries in our communities are toxic. So what this ordinance gives the opportunity is to bring all stakeholders to the table. And one of the unfortunate thing about the city, the history of the city of Chicago, when it comes to land use practices with these industries in our community, they never denied it a permit. They never cited an industry for any violations, knowing that the violation, and the classical example was the General Iron. I mean, they had an explosion before they even moved. And they still allowed them to operate to come build a new facility in a predominantly Hispanic, Black and Latino community, which is unfair. So, and this is something my mother's been talking about for many years before she passed away. She just felt that it was unfair for so many industry to be located in predominantly communities, and the city doesn't have any rules or regulations that protect communities, or to do any kind of or to do an assessment of any of the contaminants in our community. And that just wasn't on the city or the state level. I mean, the state never denied a permit, even though they know they have violations. The federal government, in particular, when you talk about the United States Environment Protection Agency, when they was erected in 1969, they was only mandated to regulate industry and work with academic institutions. They had no mandate to work with community or to give community input until President Clinton signed Executive Order 12898, and which opened up the opportunity for US EPA to work with community group, even open up the Office of Environmental Justice. But back to the community impact, it look at many of the indicators in our community that look at poor air quality in the community. And it even encompasses some probably discharge uses of some of the facilities in it. But, what I tell people is that Chicago has been so resistant to environmental changes or environmental justice. I've been doing this work in August, it'll be 40 years. And I am so happy to see all y'all in this room today. And I'm so glad to have city government sitting at the table, and I ain't got to cuss you out and fight you and tell y'all poison in our community. This is an opportunity because we have to look at, we part of the problem. We have to recognize that from our consumerism. We have to pay the piper also. And then we got to look at some of the historical things that we used to do, because we didn't have the information that we have today. The way they practiced in when George and Foreman created the sludge bed landfill in my neighborhood, that was our means of disposal. Just whatever we just buried or we put it in the water. You know, in the 1920s, hundreds of people died from drinking Lake Michigan because we was bathing in it and we was disposing our garbage in it. And people and all those influences, and that's why they reversed the Chicago River. But we're learning, you know. But unfortunately, poor communities has been targeted to bear those burdens, and we all supposed to have a responsibility in the management of whatever the waste we created, you know. And but the industry, we should not allow them to work in our community for the purpose of their bottom line. You know, we're not against business. We want business to operate in the safest way as possible to protect public health.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you, Gabby, for highlighting Cheryl.
Yeah, and can I just add one thing?
Absolutely, I was going to say. Yeah.
Cheryl, you mentioned this before, we're sitting at the same table now. And I think years in the past, I don't know if that would have really happened with the city of Chicago being, right?
I said I ain't had to fight you.
Yeah. And I think that's another beautiful story to add on to Cheryl's is, the Hazel Johnson Cumulative Impact Ordinance really embodies co-governance. It's really one of the first of its kind, honestly, where we have purposely, intentionally worked with residents, community folks, advocates who experience the issue firsthand, who live in neighborhoods, right, that are experiencing this and asking them, what should we be doing? And listening from that as well. And though it took a while, I've been with the city now for 5 years and I've been working on this ordinance pretty much for almost that entire time. We've gotten to a point where we introduced it last week in City Council. Yes, really, really excited. And, reception has been generally positive, but people are still, of course, going to be skeptical and concerned depending on who you talk to. But the case being is that, within numbers, we've definitely, created greater power. We've been able to advocate for people in the city that oftentimes in the past did not get listened to at all, right? And I'm sitting in meetings almost weekly with the folks here, and talking to them and listening to them, because this impacts them and it impacts all of us, honestly. So yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to add. I'll hand it back.
Thank you. Yeah, now I think that's a very kind of hopeful point, hearing how the ordinance is passed. Moving on to Rimmel, and you're working with equiticity. There we go. Yeah, which was really highlighted in the second film, all about how we can take a kind of green perspective, new spin on bringing movement to communities and what that means in terms of equity and justice. Yeah, can you highlight some recent projects you've been working on and how that ties into these big themes?
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me well? Yes. So, oh, that's funny. So when it comes to the work of equiticity, right, we tackle it from a racial equity lens because that is the work that we do, because we believe that all the things that we do should be done from a racial equity perspective. And part of that really starts at the beginning of having relationships with community, because as we often know, I think you were alluding to this, Cheryl, we sometimes don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know the harms that we're doing. We also don't know the inequities that we're facing, right? So in our work in building relationship with community, we first get to know them, have an understanding of where the various gaps exist. And from there, we start to do education, right? To inform people of, hey, this really shouldn't be this way. Do you know in other places they actually do have all of the things that they need? These issues of health that you're dealing with are not normal, right? And so you start to empower and teach people about their power and then start to engage them in how they show up for themselves and begin to advocate, because I agree, we all have a sense of responsibility in this work. So with some of the efforts that we do outside of just doing research and doing advocacy initiatives, we do our best to lead and provide access to the gaps that have been identified. So we have programming that has provided access to very alternative modes of transportation, because in North Lawndale, where we started, right, they have some of the highest rates of individuals who do not have access to an automobile. There's also a lot of issues with the air quality, with the water quality. We know about Ogale Gardens and their environmental issues, but Lawndale and that area also had to deal with the Civil Shovel Project. Many of you may be familiar with that, right? So this is, you know, what we're seeing today, what they're doing on the southeast side is really, unfortunately, history repeating itself. And so I would agree that we have to have governmental entities at the table to say, we're going to put forth legislation to say we're no longer going to allow these things to occur, because then it will eventually be another side of the city, another side of the town. So with some of the other work that we do at Equiticity, currently projects that we're doing and working with some of our great community advisory council members in the room in Bronzeville, is talking about a mobility hub. And what that mobility hub will do, which is different than the traditional sense of a mobility hub, is address the transportation inequities for the community. We know that Bronzeville is a predominantly Black community. It has varying income levels, but we still have a significant low income base here. And so it's really important to us to address those transportation inequities by providing access to in a low to no cost way to individuals in the neighborhood, because we know that we have the divvies, we have the zip cars, but market rate just isn't affordable for most people. And so how do we bridge those gaps so that we do help towards the better quality of life for these residents, to address how they get better health care, how do they get access to healthier food, how do they get access to job opportunities? Like, all of these things play a role. And so that's just some of the things that, you know, we're doing at Equiticity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing, and round of applause for them as well. Yeah, so I now wanted to introduce a kind of open-ended question, right? I posed a question to the audience of, you know, what themes stuck out in the films that resonated with you. To the panel here, is there a specific theme that really connected with your ongoing work? And I know we've covered a few really clean, connected topics, but anything you point out that we didn't discuss here yet?
I would just say the frustration with having to advocate still and fight about these things with government, right? Cheryl just pointed out 40 years that she's been doing this work. Being someone at my stage in life, you couldn't tell me that these are things that I would still have to be fighting for. How am I learning about things that I still have to fight for? Right? Like, we're teaching young people the education of their history in Chicago, yet they're growing up having to still fight against those inequities, these injustices. So I think, to me, that's what stood out, especially when you guys did reference the time period. I'm like, man, 2022. And I met Olga a while ago, many years ago. So seeing her in this film, and I'm like, this is still happening. So I think, for me, that's the biggest issue, because at what point is there political will? You know, we keep hearing about who our enemies are, but I think it's time for our friends to show up, because if we have so many friends, then I think some of these issues should not be in existence anymore.
Thank you. Yeah, that definitely resonated with me as well. Cheryl, did you?
Yeah, what stuck out with me is that the slag, we always call it the slag pile. And I was real ignorant. I didn't know that we call it the hill. I'm just being honest. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah, we've been fighting this for a long time. I just want to put a little point of information out. when the Ford Motor Company built their supplier campus in that area, they was bringing, most of their suppliers come from Argentina at that particular time, even a screw. And they was more concerned about bringing 99 of their tier one suppliers. That means everything that's built on the inside, dashboard, all the plastic side. They wanted to bring them all here. And they was promising, because the city of Chicago gave them 60 million, no, it's 40 million, and the state of Illinois gave them 100 million to build that plant, to build the plant. And they was promising to clean up and build the remaining, because I think they only built like 14 facilities over there, but they wanted 99 of their suppliers over there. But when the automobile industry crashed, what was that, in 2008, 2009, or something, 2010? That thought process went away. But this was a promise, y'all. This was a promise that Ford Motor Company was going to clean it up. And then since the auto industry crashed, no one is having that conversation with them. But they still owe us that cleanup and that development. I don't know if they still want to bring majority of their suppliers over to that facility, but that was just a promise that was, and that just, when I seen all that, when I seen all the slag, and I was looking, I was like, well, there go a promise that be broken, but we as taxpayer have foot that bill for them to build that supplier campus, and we need to start having that conversation back with them. Then whatever happened to the promise that you was going to clean up and expand your facility on the other side? Because that was supposed to serve as the economic engine for the southeast side of Chicago. Did who get paid? Well, they got to build their supplier campus to bring 13 of their suppliers from Argentina. Yes, they did, and made that SS road. The SS, because we used to have to all the way to 106 to get over east. Now we could go on 126 in Torrance and go east to Avenue O. All that wasn't open, and that was all the. So it was more than 100 million that was spent from the government standpoint, but that was really to help Ford develop and expand their facility over there. I'm just saying that it just brought that back up, like they reneged, because we made that commitment as a state and the city.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and yeah, a highlight of this kind of push and pull capitalist.
And one more thing, majority at that particular time, we was fighting with trying to establish a good neighbor agreement with the Ford Motor Company. 80% of their workforce came from Valparaiso or from Hammond, Indiana. They wouldn't hire in the city of Chicago. And they used the unemployment office, particularly one in Harvey, to do all their hiring. So we made them open it up to 6 other zip codes in proximity of their facility. But guess what they did with the other 5? They accept people's resume but threw them in the garbage. And they still hire from Harvey, Illinois. Unemployment office.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Any other highlights from panelists? Might open briefly for any audience questions. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Alan Lindrup. I'm a South Shore resident. Panelists have talked about cumulative impact, the new Hazel Johnson ordinance and so forth. And we have representatives from the city of Chicago. And we've got a major development happening in the U.S. Steelworks site. And the major developer, related to Ms. West, says they're going to voluntarily do some remediation of the site, which is very toxic. The community is very concerned about being poisoned, but they're not willing to meet with us formally. They're not willing to putting anything in writing. It's just like a promise that's, they can just ignore. They supposedly have this agreement, no further remediation requirement since the 1990s. We know the testing was only about 1/4 what they were supposed to do, and it's not up to current standards. There's a lot of toxins there, and the city is not really pushing Related Midwest to come to some agreement in writing with the community. And we're afraid of being poisoned. And so I'd like to hear from the city representative and others who are concerned about cumulative impact as to what can be done to address this situation.
Thank you for raising that and for asking. So I understand that there are concerns over at the related site and the remediation. And I know that there has been a lot of advocacy work and community work to get the city and get the related partners, and not just related, capital R, but all of the partners that are involved on the project to talk to community and be transparent. I totally understand that. And what I can say to you, even though I don't know much of the project myself, I'm more on the cumulative impact ordinance side, but obviously the two are relate, right? How can you not remediate, right, and then still pass an environmental justice ordinance? So I think what I would say is, I want to hear more. I want to know more because it's an area that I'm not too familiar with myself, and also understand where, why aren't we speaking in a more transparent way? I think that what you said was really resonating with me, at least, is why are we still fighting for the same issues, right? If, we just saw a film where the Shroud site, there was promises to remediate that never happened, right? And we're now just starting that process. Why are we continuing the same occurrences in the same areas, right? And I think that it they are like-minded people. I think that I think we need to start talking to each other a little bit more. I'm happy to stick around and talk more. But that's to the extent that I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for taking the question. Thank you for posing the question. Unfortunately, we are over time. I'm so sorry. I know this has been such an engaging and wonderful discussion. It was great watching these films. Just for closing remarks, and I encourage you, feel free to chat with folks after. You can talk to me, whoever is willing to engage. Thank you for joining this One Earth Film Fest screening event. The 2005 One Earth season theme is Power in Unity. It really is a rallying call that we all should stand together. We can make true change against our climate crisis and its intersecting environmental injustices together. And we invite you to turn any inspiration you may have gained today into taking just one action in the next 2 to 4 months. For info on attending other festival events this week or in the incoming months, visit oneearthfilmfestivalfest.org. And then, yeah, thank you again for coming. Thank you for being here and engaging in these
I'm
conversations.
going to actually add something. So I want
Absolutely.
to thank the One Earth Film Festival for hosting, for organizing all of this. If you thought this film was interesting to you and you want others to also watch it, it actually is streaming for free on WTTW's website. So if you Google WTTW in the Hills, it'll pop up. So I think part of the reasons I made the film is that the stories are so contained on the southeast side, and the rest of Chicago knows so little about it. So I'm relying on you to help spread the word. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.